I'm Welton Gaddy. Welcome to State of Belief, continuing coverage of the 2020 Republican National Convention. After watching the first night of the Trump convention, I felt there was something missing from our planning daily coverage. As a survivor of the political religious right, I understand a lot of the extreme God talk that we've been hearing already, and I feel equipped to analyze and evaluate these words and whom they target. But there's also overtones here that I'm not so fluent in. A great example is the McCloskeys and their guns, who claim to have felt threatened by a peaceful march because of the color of the marcher's skin. Who do narratives like that appeal to? What people are like that? Now, Christian Picciolini is an activist working to help neo-Nazi extremists leave a life of hate as a former extremist and now the leader of the Free Radicals Project. Christian, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So, who are the Americans that are likely to be receptive to messages like that of the McCloskeys?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's all Americans who, depending on the circumstances, might be susceptible to certain messaging. We're living in a time right now where we all have access to information at our fingertips. And unfortunately, with that comes access to misinformation as well. We're living at a time of really raised emotions. And I've always said, and other experts have always said as well, uncertainty is what drives people towards extremism. And we are indeed living in uncertain times. Not only are we dealing with, a controversial election and politicians, we're dealing with a pandemic. We're dealing with unprecedented job loss, the closing of businesses, protests because of police brutality. And all of these things are happening at the same time, creating a real mass of uncertainty with people. So I think when people are uncertain, they tend to think for out-of-the-box solutions. And unfortunately, some people have access to solutions that are stemming from, far-right propaganda, and they're embracing that because it's filling a void in their life in some way, falsely.
But what does it mean that this is a part of the official Republican National Convention?
Well, I can tell you from watching just the first night of it, within the first few minutes of the opening statement, there was a claim by Charlie Kirk, who's the founder of Turning Point USA, which is in many ways what I see as an alt-right feeder organization, where he made a statement saying that, President Trump was the defender of Western civilization. And to me, somebody who used those words 30 years ago when I was a member of a white supremacist group, those are the types of coded messages we would use in terms of marketing. We didn't always go out and wave a swastika flag and say we, believed in Hitler's ideals. Sometimes we went under the radar depending on who we were trying to recruit, and said we were protecting something of great value to them, which was this Western European heritage. Rather than calling it white power, we called it, white pride. So there are all these kind of hidden messages that are very, very dangerous to people who really can't read between the lines of what's being sold to them.
Christian, I think it's undeniable that fringe elements have been mainstreamed by this administration, but I'm not ready to state just how far afield they actually have gone. So with your expertise, I fearfully want to ask, are you hearing messages that you recognize as dog whistles for white supremacists and neo-Nazis?
I'm absolutely hearing messages that are dog whistles. Whether they're intentional or not is still, anybody's guess, I think, at this point. But the messages I'm hearing almost mirror directly what I would have said 30 years ago as a neo-Nazi skinhead. From the conspiracy theories that are being promoted in certain cases to the promotion of certain things like this idea of a white genocide that is occurring, to some of the messages even being put out recently by the president to suburban housewives to make them afraid of their neighborhoods being taken over, or the fact that he'll stop low-income housing from being built in their neighborhoods. Those are all coded messages that racists have typically used to talk about people of color. It's those messages that are landing both on very open racists and white supremacists, but also people who think that they're not racist but are buying into a racist message, and that's very, very dangerous. Which is why being not racist is just not good enough. We must be actively anti-racist and not complicit with the white supremacy that's inherent in our institutions and systems.
How does religion get used in all of this?
Well, I think, religion is bastardized and morphed into some sort of a propaganda play, because they're using people's faith to draw them into these kind of camps of further fear, right? So, they change the message of faith to appeal to their racism, and they draw people in with whatever grievances they have into these kind of subcultures of pseudo religion. So it's really dangerous. People need religion. They need faith to fulfill them. It inspires their values. But when they're corrupted and these manipulators are pulling people in, they're really targeting vulnerable people and their faith. So it's something I see quite often, unfortunately, in all sorts of extremist type situations.
Would you talk about what mainstream Americans need to know about these kinds of movements, and what we each need to be carefully listening for, both this week and in the broader culture?
Well, I think we need to be paying attention to certain cues that are directed at a certain group of people while alienating other groups of Americans. We need to be careful of the fear rhetoric. When we hear things that are made to make people afraid, that is not a positive thing. What we want to hear are solutions, and we want to see actions based on that solution. We want to see progress, and what I've heard so far being pitched is not about progress. It is really about trying to be reelected on a same platform that he was very vocal about coming into the 2016 election. Right? The message hasn't changed. The policies haven't changed, although there really is no political platform going into this election. But we need to be careful of them using fear to make us afraid to stay in the status quo. When the status quo and the normal that we so desperately want to get back to wasn't good for certain people, certain Americans. It was never good. Normal was dangerous. It was deadly for certain Americans. So we need to get past that and move to a new normal.
Christian, you've written about this extensively, so I know you have an answer to a complex question. What is it that draws people into a culture of hate? I know it's often young men that are most susceptible, but even more broadly, what makes movements like the one you left so attractive to people?
I wish there was an easy answer to that question. It is a complicated thing. But from what I've learned and what I've studied and how I've helped people disengage from hate over the last 20 years, what I've surmised is that it is not the ideology that is drawing people to that movement. Instead, it's a search for identity, community, and purpose. And that's something that every single person on earth searches for at some point in their life. And typically, with young people, they're searching for those things right around 14, 15, 16, when it's so popular to become a part of, or to be idealistic and become part of an extremist movement, unfortunately. But it also happens with an older generation who's maybe retired and is now struggling with a sense of identity, community, and purpose once again. But since we're all searching for those things, not all of us become extremists. What else has to happen is there have to be potholes in that life's journey that occur. Potholes can be anything like trauma, abuse, poverty, even privilege can be a pothole if it keeps us so separated from the reality of humanity. And those potholes can detour us if we don't pay close attention to them. And when we're detoured on the fringes, there are people with messages trying to corrupt us, trying to pull us in. And since we're all searching for that identity, community, and purpose, if we can't find that in positive ways, sometimes we find it in these negative pathways.
This is a little bit redundant, but because we're talking about it during the week of this convention, and we're trying to evaluate the people that we're listening to, you said that on the first night, you immediately, in the first words of the speaker, you knew what was going on. I remember those words, and I knew I didn't like them, but I didn't know how badly I ought to not like them. So for people who are listening, watching and listening this week, what are some of the key words or, well, let me leave with that. Some of the key words that we need to be hearing, and then what we need to be hearing about them.
Well, I think we need to start conditioning ourselves to stop listening to words and start looking for actions, past actions and movement towards future actions. So much of what's occupying our time these days are words. And unfortunately, words have power and they hurt people as well. And especially if they're coming from above, they have, the capability to impact many, many people. So what I would say is, let's look beyond those words, maybe beneath them, and start to analyze what the actions are. If the actions that are taking place by the people saying them are fitting with your values, well, then I think you've made your decision. If they don't fit your values in any way, then it's time to look for another option, right? So the words that we're hearing coming from the podium at the Republican National Convention or the Democratic National Convention, they'll say something. But what we need to do is look beneath those and look at the actions historically of those people, the policies that they've supported, how their words and actions have impacted others, and make our decisions based on that. It's time to dig deeper.
That's so interesting. I remember Rachel Maddow is a good friend of mine, and I remember the day that she said to me the first time, Welton, I am no longer listening to the White House. I will see what they're doing, but I'm not going to pay any attention to what they're saying. And that's exactly what you are saying here. And it's good advice for us. Well, I want to end on a positive note. Your work is all about helping people leave cultures and communities of hate. Is there something we should know about how that process starts? And is there anything we can each do to help create the space for that to happen?
Sure. And space is an important word. Welton is part of that, but accountability is also important. So while people do need a safe space to be able to grow, to self-reflect, because that is the first step. You have to self-reflect and analyze your actions, your motivations of why you did those things. But the next stage is so important, and that's being accountable for what you've done and repairing the damage that you've caused. And so many people will say, well, I'm not that person anymore. And that's great. Again, we're going to go back to actions. What have you done to repair that harm, right? So while we do need to create space, because I think people in an intense, kind of blast furnace, it's tough for people to change and for them to breathe enough to see what they need to do to change. But if given that little safe space to contemplate, to self-reflect, and to understand how their actions and words have affected others, then I think they can hold themselves accountable, and we can hold them and should hold them accountable for what they've done.
Christian Picciolini heads up the Free Radicals Project, a global network working to prevent extremism and helping people disengage from hate movements and other violent ideologies. He's the author of White American Youth, My Descent into America's Most Violent Hate Movement, and How I Got Out and Breaking Hate. Confronting the New Culture of Extremism. Christian, I can't tell you how helpful it is to talk with you. And I hope, in fact, that we can get together again, because your wisdom comes from deep experience, and you can help us understand things that we'll never understand unless we hear it from someone like you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
It's my pleasure, Welton. It's a pleasure to be here, but it's also a privilege getting this second chance. It's important to recognize that there are so many people who are Americans who have not gotten a second chance because of the color of their skin, and in some cases, even a first chance. So we must change that. Thank you very much.
For all of you, look for more of our convention coverage, including interviews with leaders, activists, and delegates all week at stateofbelief.com. I'm Welton Gaddy. Thanks for watching.